Welcome to the world of sci-fi stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the channel. Enjoy the listening. I was lying naked in room when alien princess came into my room. The room was cloaked in shadows, illuminated only by the dim blue light spilling from the window. Rain drummed steadily against the glass, thick clouds smothering the moon, while the occasional rumble of thunder vibrated through the night. David sat on the edge of his bed, freshly out of the shower towel. Discarded on the floor, naked and alone, he stretched his limbs, the cool air raising goosebumps on his skin. He had always enjoyed this time of night. No emails, no phone calls, no obligations, just him and the soft hum of existence. Tonight, though, an odd tension lingered in the air, a strange prickle at the back of his neck, as if the universe was holding its breath. He shook it off, running a hand through his damp hair. Just a storm, nothing more. And then the room cracked open. A flash of blinding white light burst in the center of the space, accompanied by a soft hum, as if reality itself had shifted out of tune. David shot upright, every muscle tensing before he could react further. The light collapsed into itself, leaving behind the shimmering outline of something impossible, a portal. It hovered midair, swirling with threads of iridescent silver and blue, casting shimmering shadows along the walls. David's heart thundered against his ribs. Before his mind could comprehend what was happening, she stepped through. The figure was tall and elegant, her silhouette fluid and ethereal. She moved as if gravity obeyed her whims, each step purposeful, deliberate. When she emerged fully into the room, the portal behind her flickered and vanished, plunging the space into the dim light. Once more David stood frozen, breath locked in his throat. The woman or creature was like nothing he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered like the ocean under moonlight, soft blue with hints of violet that danced across her frame as she moved. Long silver white hair cascaded down her back in waves, glimmering like stardust. Her eyes, large and glowing with a strange inner light, were a striking blend of azure and gold, swirling like galaxies in her iris. She wore a garment that seemed alive, thin, translucent fabric woven with silver threads that glimmered faintly. It clung to her frame, shifting with her movements, and though it covered her, it left very little to imagination. Her bare feet made no sound as she stepped forward, the air growing heavier with her presence. David staggered back a step, his nakedness suddenly feeling like a glaring vulnerability. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. Who are you?" His voice cracked, an edge of panic creeping into it. The alien woman's eyes locked onto his, and in them was a strange mixture: curiosity, resolve, and something darker, more intimate. She tilted her head slightly as though analyzing him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then, without warning, her voice slipped directly into his mind. "You are the one." David gasped and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the bed. "A human male," her voice whispered again in his thoughts, soft yet commanding, laced with an alien cadence that was strangely beautiful. "You are compatible." David repeated, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. His heart raced wildly. "Compatible." For what? The alien woman took a slow step forward, her gaze sweeping over him with a deliberate intensity. There was no embarrassment in her eyes, no trace of human modesty. If anything, her expression suggested satisfaction, as though she'd found exactly what she had been looking for. "For the continuation of my species," she said, her voice calm and unyielding, like a fact that could not be challenged. "You will breed with me." The words landed like a punch to David's gut. His mind scrambled to process the situation. This couldn't be real, none of it could. Maybe he was dreaming, maybe he'd hit his head in the shower, and this was some kind of bizarre hallucination. But the sensation of the cold floor beneath his feet, the smell of rain drifting through the cracked window, and the glowing eyes boring into his soul, all told him otherwise. This was real, too real. He backed away until the wall met his spine, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. "Wait, hold on, you can't just— What the hell are you talking about?" Laura, the name entered his mind without warning, as though it had been planted there. Did not blink. She was impossibly still, her body radiating the strange energy that made the air around her hum. "Your kind is compatible," she said, her voice echoing faintly in his skull. "The ritual must begin." David's throat tightened. No, wait, you can't just— I mean, I'm naked here." Laura's gaze flickered down his body, her expression unfazed by his outburst. If anything, she seemed intrigued by his discomfort. "The state of your body is irrelevant," she said plainly. "We require only the essence. The form matters little." David's mind raced. He could feel panic. "Work here, okay, people have I don't know boundaries." Elle's head tilted slightly again, as though the concept of boundaries was foreign to her. There was no malice in her gaze, only purpose, a purpose so absolute that it left no room for argument or resistance. "There is no time," she said simply. With that, she raised a hand, and the room pulsed with a strange warmth. David felt it first as a soft, tingling sensation at the base of his spine, spreading quickly across his skin. It was as though invisible threads of energy had begun wrapping around him, pulling him gently toward her. His breath itched as his muscles grew slack, his mind fogging over with an odd dreamlike haze. It was as if his body no longer obeyed him. His limbs felt heavy and warm, his skin hypers, sensitive to the slightest touch of air. "Wait," he whispered. Weakly, the words slipping from his lips like vapor. Laura stepped closer, and her presence was overwhelming, her scent like some exotic flower blooming at midnight, her skin glowing faintly in the darkness. David's heartbeat quickened as she reached out her hand, hovering just above his chest. He could feel the heat radiating from her palm, and when she finally touched him, just a light brush of fingertips, it sent a jolt through his entire body. Every nerve lit up, his skin burning with the intensity of it. He gasped, his knees nearly buckling beneath him. "It will not hurt," Laura whispered, her voice softening slightly. "You will feel only pleasure." David's mind screamed at him to move, to run, to do anything other than stand there like prey before a predator, but his body refused to respond. The energy in the room thickened, pressing down on him like a weighted blanket. Laura's other hand lifted to his face, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw with fever-like precision. David shivered, the sensation both alien and oddly intoxicating. It was unlike any touch he had ever felt, something deeper than physical contact, as though she was touching his very ends. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was a plea to stop or to continue. Her glowing eyes held his, and in them he saw something unexpected, loneliness beneath the alien authority and cold purpose. There was a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of desperation. "We must begin," she murmured. "There is no other way." David's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. He realized with a sickening twist of dread that there was no escape. This was not a request, it was a destiny. David's mind raced as the alien princess stood inches from him, her presence overwhelming and suffocating. His heart hammered like a drum against his ribs, and every inch of his skin burned with heightened sensitivity. Laura's strange energy pulsed through the air between them, thick and undeniable, like invisible tendrils wrapping around him, pressing him toward a fate that felt inescapable. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to do anything but stand there, but it was as if his body had betrayed him. His limbs remained heavy and unresponsive, fear seethed through him, but beneath it an odd curiosity gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. A part of him, a very primal part, felt drawn to her. "I need to think, please give me time." David's thoughts swirled in frantic circles, but the words never left. His mouth, he clenched his fists, desperate to regain control of his own body. Laura's gaze never wavered. She seemed patient, yet there was a subtle urgency beneath her calm exterior, as if some unseen clock was ticking down. Her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, and a flicker of alien emotion passed across her face, something too strange and fleeting for David to grasp fully. "Time is a luxury my people do not have," she whispered directly into his mind, her voice as soft as silk, but weighted with sorrow. "We are at the brink of extinction. If we do not act now, it will be too late." David swallowed hard, his throat dry. "There has to be another way. You can't just..." His voice faltered under her unblinking stare. "There is no other way." Laura said, her words final, like the closing of a door. She took another step closer, and David felt the warmth radiating from her like a slow-burning fire, her scent floral, strange, intoxicating, curled around him, clouding his mind with every breath. "Listen carefully," Laura continued, her voice steady and measured, as if trying to make him understand the gravity of the situation. "I did not choose you at random. There is a reason. It must be you." David blinked, his pulse thrumming in his ears. "What do You mean me? I'm just some random guy. You are not random, Laura interrupted, her voice tinged with quiet conviction. There is a connection between us, a forgotten bond written in the stars, one that goes beyond your comprehension. David tried to back away, but his legs remained frozen in place, as though held by invisible strings. You keep saying I'm the one, but you're not explaining anything. What connection? What bond? His voice rose, frustration bubbling to the surface. Laura regarded him with a strange mix of patience and pity. Then, with a wave of her hand, the air around them shimmered, and David's room seemed to dissolve into a vision, a memory that wasn't his. The vision he saw flashes of an alien world, vibrant and breathtaking. Towers of crystal rose into a lavender sky, and rivers of liquid light flowed through forests of silver trees. He felt Laura's presence, younger and full of hope, surrounded by others of her kind, but the beauty was marred by something dark, a creeping sickness that spread across the land like a shadow. Her people, once strong and proud, began to wither, their luminous skin dimming, their energy draining away. They searched desperately for a cure, a way to survive, but nothing worked. The only solution lay in ancient prophecies, a union between their kind and a human of specific bloodlines. The image shifted again, and David saw glimpses of himself, moments from his childhood he'd long forgotten. There was a strange glow around him, as if he had always carried a spark of something alien deep within his soul. The vision shattered, and David was back in his room, gasping for breath. His head spun, and a cold sweat coated his skin. What the hell was that? He whispered, his voice shaky. Your ancestors were marked, Ulra said quietly. A fragment of our essence was passed down through your bloodline, waiting for the moment it would awaken. That moment is now. David shook his head, struggling to process what he had seen. You're saying I'm part alien? That's insane. It is not insanity, Ulra replied, her expression unwavering. It is fate. You carry what we need to survive, the only chance we have left. David's knees felt weak. He sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of any prophecy or bond, or whatever this is. Ulra knelt before him, her movements slow and deliberate. For the first time, David saw a flicker of vulnerability in her, something almost human. I know you did not ask for this, she whispered, her voice laced with something that resembled regret. But neither did I. Yet here we are. Her hand rested lightly on his knee, and the touch sent to shiver up his spine, not from cold, but from the strange warmth that seemed to seep through his skin and settle deep in his bones. It was a touch unlike any he had ever felt, gentle yet filled with unspoken need. David's heart thick in his chest, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like an avalanche. Why me? He whispered, his voice barely audible. Because you are the only one left who can save us, Ulra said softly. If you refuse, my people will fade into oblivion. I will fade. Her words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and for a moment the only sound was the steady patter of rain against the window. David could see the pain in her eyes, the desperation she tried so hard to hide beneath her calm exterior. I do not want to force you, she murmured, her gaze dropping for the first time. But I have no choice. David swallowed hard, his throat tight. The weight of her words settled over him like a suffocating blanket. If he said no, if he refused, an entire race would vanish. Ulra would vanish. But if he said yes, a knot of fear and uncertainty twisted in his gut. This wasn't just about sex or breeding. It was about something far more profound, something he didn't fully understand. He looked at Ulra, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions, fear, doubt, curiosity, and something else. Something dangerous. What happens if I agree? He asked quietly, his voice trembling. Ulra met his gaze, her glowing eyes filled with something that looked like hope. Then we begin the ritual, she whispered, and you will become more than you ever imagined. David's skin prickled, the weight of her words sinking deep into his soul. He knew in that moment that there was no turning back. Whatever choice he made, it would change everything. David's hands trembled, cold sweat trickling down the back of his neck. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was no way out. Not really. He stared at Ulra, her glowing blue eyes drawing him deeper into this surreal web of destiny she had spun around him. We begin the ritual, she had said, her voice soft yet resolute. His heart pounded. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing against him like a leaden curtain. What did beginning mean? What would happen to him, to her? Yet, despite the chaos in his mind, a dangerous curiosity gnawed at him. Something primal stirred deep within, as though a hidden part of him recognized this moment. "I didn't agree to this, not fully," David whispered, his throat dry. But the words felt hollow, as though he were trying to convince himself. Aura's lips curved into a faint smile, soft, almost sad. She knelt on the floor, her silken robe sliding off her shoulder like a whisper of moonlight. The room seemed to pulse with strange energy, as though the walls themselves vibrated with ancient power. "You are here," she murmured, "and that is enough. Trust me, you will understand soon." David clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms in a futile attempt to ground himself. Aura shifted closer, her delicate hand brushing his arm. The touch was featheral, but it set every nerve in his body alight. His skin tingled as if electrified, and his breath hitched involuntarily. "What are you doing to me?" His voice was a hoarse whisper caught between fear and fascination. Aura's expression softened, her hand lingering on his skin. "This is only the beginning. I am awakening what sleeps within you." She paused, brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. "And what sleeps within me?" David shivered under her touch, torn between the urge to pull away and the dangerous temptation to lean into it. His mind spun with conflicting emotions. This was insane, completely insane, and yet the magnetic pull between them grew stronger. With each passing second, like gravity itself was shifting around them. Aura leaned closer, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "Breathe, David." Her voice was soft, but commanding, like a lullaby laced with steel. David inhaled, and with that breath everything changed. The air between them thickened, vibrating with unearthly energy. Aura's eyes blazed brighter, and David felt an odd tug deep in his chest, as if invisible threads were pulling him toward her. A warmth spread from where her hand touched his arm, radiating outward until it enveloped his entire body. He gasped as strange sensations bloomed beneath his skin, like fire and ice, well together, twisting through his veins. Every muscle in his body tensed, then relaxed in a slow, deliberate wave. His mind reeled, struggling to make sense of what was happening, but his body responded to Aura with an unsettling ease, as if it had known her touch for centuries. "I can feel it," Aura whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The connection, it's growing." David clenched his jaw, fighting the strange pull. "What connection? What are you doing to me?" His gaze darkened with something ancient and unfathomable, but beneath it David glimpsed something raw and vulnerable. "We are becoming one, David. Our energies must align for the ritual to succeed." A flicker of panic surged through him. "Align? What the hell does that even mean?" Lunk lips quirked in a ghost of a smile. "It means you must stop fighting what you already feel." Before David could respond, Aura's hand trailed up his arm. Her touch had delicate dance of warmth and pressure. Every nerve in his body came alive beneath her fingertips, and a low shiver ran down his spine. "Stop resisting." Her voice whispered in his mind, soft and insistent. "Feel it, David. Let it guide you." His breath itched as Aura's touch grew bolder, her fingers tracing the curve of his shoulder with deliberate slowness. The air between them shimmered thick with unspoken promises. A part of him, a heart buried deep beneath layers of fear and denial, wanted to give in. This is madness, David thought, but the words felt distant, lost in the rising tide of sensation. His skin burned when she touched him, and his heart pounded in a frantic rhythm that matched the strange pulse in the air. Aura's other hand brushed his cheek, her touch impossibly gentle. "It's not madness," he whispered aloud, as if hearing his thoughts. "It's destiny." David's pulse thundered in his ears. He was drowning in her presence, sinking deeper into the strange connection that tethered them together. Every fiber of his being screamed that this was wrong, and yet something far deeper whispered that it was right. Aura leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. "You feel it, don't you?" she murmured, her voice like a caress. "The bond between us, it cannot be denied." David's chest tightened, a storm of emotions swirling within him: fear, desire, confusion, longing. He wanted to pull away, but his body betrayed him, leaning ever so slightly toward her. "I don't understand." The words escaped him in a whisper, raw and vulnerable. Lunk gaze softened. "You don't need to understand." She whispered, "You only need to feel the space between them dissolved," and Laura's arms wrapped around him, pulling him into an embrace that felt both alien and achingly familiar. Her body was warm against his, every curve fitting against him, as if they were two halves of a puzzle finally coming together. David's breath stuttered, and for a moment everything else faded, his doubts, his fear, his confusion. All that remained was the sensation of Laura's skin against his, the rhythmic thrum of her heartbeat syncing with his own. This is real, David thought, a strange sense of clarity washing over him. This is happening. Laura's hands moved with deliberate grace, tracing patterns across his back, each touch igniting sparks of sensation that spread like wildfire through his body. David shivered beneath her touch, his skin hypersensitive to every caress. "Let go," Laura whispered in his mind, her voice tender and soothing. "Let the bond take hold." David exhaled, slowly surrendering to the strange pull between them. His hands found their way to Laura's waist, and a jolt of energy surged through him. The moment he touched her, it was as if their very souls were colliding, merging into something greater than the sum of their parts. Laura gasped softly, her glowing eyes fluttering shut for a brief moment. Yes, she breathed just like that. David's mind swirled with conflicting emotions, fear, desire, but beneath it all a strange sense of peace began to bloom. This was more than a ritual, it was an awakening. As their bodies pressed closer together, the room around them seemed to shimmer and pulse with unearthly light. The air crackled with energy, and David could feel something ancient stirring deep within him, something that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for this moment. Laura's lips brushed against his ear, her breath warm and reassuring. "We are almost there," she whispered. "Do you feel it?" David nodded slowly, his heart pounding in sync with the strange rhythm that thrummed through the air. The bond between them was no longer just a concept, it was real, tangible, a force that pulsed through his veins and resonated with every fiber of his being. This is it, David thought, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration washing over him. "There's no turning back now." Laura's hands cued his face, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "You are ready," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "We are ready." In that moment, David knew deep in his soul that he had crossed the threshold from which there was no return. The ritual had begun. David's skin buzzed as if charged with electricity, his every nerve attuned to the alien presence before him. The room seemed alive, humming with a vibration that resonated deep in his bones. Elle's glowing blue gaze pierced through him, drawing him closer to the point of no return. He was no longer just a man, nor was she merely an alien princess. They were intertwined now, two beings on the cusp of something monumental. The ritual they had begun was no simple union, it was a convergence of worlds of destiny, and neither could walk away unchanged. "What's happening to me?" David thought, his mind teetering on the edge of comprehension. His body felt alien, as though his sea were shifting, preparing for something he couldn't yet understand. Laura's soft voice, soothing yet commanding, broke through his thoughts. "The ritual will complete soon. Trust the process." "David, you are ready. This was always meant to happen." But even as she spoke, a shadow flickered across her face. Something unspoken, something she hadn't told him. "What aren't you saying?" David demanded, panic creeping into his voice. Laura's expression faltered for a fraction of a second, her radiant confidence stemming ever so slightly. But she recovered quickly, her hand sliding up his arm in a reassuring touch. "You will see soon enough. There is no more time for questions. We must finish what we started." The glow from Laura's body intensified, wrapping the two of them in a shimmering cocoon of energy. David could feel the vibrations in his chest, resonating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts, fear, longing, confusion, but his body moved on instinct, now responding to the unrelenting pull between them. Laura's hands pressed against his chest, and David shuddered under the weight of her touch. It was as if she were pulling something from within him, something hidden and ancient, something primal that had laid dormant for far too long. "It's happening," Laura whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We are becoming one." David's pulse thundered in his ears. He could feel it now, the bond solidifying, fusing, using their very essences together. It was more than physical, it was metaphysical, a melding of mind, body, and soul. Every touch, every glance, every breath, they shared brought them closer to the culmination of the ritual, and then the world shifted. David gasped as a surge of energy coursed through him, overwhelming his senses. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment he felt as though he were floating weightless, untethered from reality. Time itself seemed to stretch and twist, bending around them in ways that defied logic. Laura's voice echoed in his mind, "Stay with me, David, we are almost there." With a sudden jolt, David's feet hit solid ground and his vision cleared, but the room around them was no longer the same. The walls shimmered like liquid glass, and strange symbols, alien glyphs, glowed faintly along the surfaces, pulsing in time with their synchronized heartbeats. David could feel the change within him, now a deep, undeniable shift. His senses were sharper, his body lighter, and his mind was no longer his alone. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Laura stepped closer, her glowing gaze soft and filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and hope. "This is the moment we create something new, something that has never existed before." David's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "Create." Lunk's hand rested on his chest, her touch warm and grounding. "Our union is not just for us, David, it's for the survival of my kind and yours. We are forging a bridge between two worlds, bringing forth life that will transcend both." David staggered back, his mind reeling. "You mean you want to?" Elle's expression softened. "Yes, we will breed, David, but it's more than just biology, it's destiny." David's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and awe washing over him. He could feel the truth in her words, even if his mind struggled to comprehend it. This was not just about them. This was about something far greater, a legacy that would change the course of history for both their species. But as the energy between them reached its peak, David sensed something else, something dark and ominous lurking just beneath the surface. He could feel it in Laura's hesitation and the flicker of fear that crossed her radiant features. "There's something you're not telling me," David whispered, his voice filled with quiet dread. "What's the cost of this ritual?" Lunk's gaze dropped, her confidence faltering for the first time. "There is a price," she admitted softly. "The bond between us is irreversible. Once we complete the ritual, you will never be the same. Neither will I." David's throat tightened. "What do you mean? What will happen to us?" Laura hesitated, her expression torn between sorrow and determination. "You will become something more, but in doing so you may lose parts of yourself, pieces of who you are now, and I will no longer be who I once was either." David's heart clenched. "So we become what? Something else entirely?" Laura nodded, her glowing eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Yes, but it's the only way. Without this, my people will fade, and your world will remain blind to what lies beyond." David closed his eyes, his mind spinning with the weight of her words. This was no ordinary choice. It was a sacrifice, a transformation that would leave them both forever changed, but deep down he knew there was no turning back. "I understand," he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Laura smiled, a sad, beautiful smile filled with gratitude and longing. "Thank you, David." The energy between them surged, reaching a crescendo that was both terrifying and exhilarating. David could feel it now, the power of their union, the vast potential that lay within their bond. Laura's body pressed against his, and in that moment everything else faded. There were no more doubts, no more fears, only the overwhelming sensation of becoming. Their bodies moved in perfect harmony, each touch, each breath bringing them closer to the final moment of creation. David could feel the universe shifting around them, as though they were at the center of something far greater than themselves. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the ritual reached its climax. David cried out as the energy between them exploded outward, filling the room with a radiant pulse that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of existence. In that moment, he felt as though he were everywhere and nowhere at once, connected to everything yet completely free. Laura's voice echoed in his mind one last time. "It is done." When the light finally dimmed, David collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, his body ached, every muscle sore from the intensity of the ritual. But beneath the exhaustion, he felt different, whole. Laura knelt beside him, her glowing gaze filled with quiet satisfaction. "You did it," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with gratitude. David managed a weak smile. "So what now?" Laura's expression softened. "Now we begin anew together." David's heart swelled with a strange sense of peace for the first time in his life. He felt as though he truly belonged, connected to something far greater than himself, and as Elle leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his forehead, David knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The ritual was complete. Their journey had only just begun.